Welcome to Securing America with me, Frank Gaffney, the program that's a kind of owner's manual for protecting the country we love against all enemies, foreign and domestic, for God's glory and that of his kingdom. And to talk about some of the most important parts of this battle space we're in at the moment with respect, well, to the kingdom, among other things, I'm very pleased to have with us David Wurmser. Dr. Wurmser is an extraordinarily accomplished public servant, a naval intelligence officer, also a civilian advisor to Vice President of the United States, the National Security Advisor, Undersecretaries of State, and the like. He has brought all of that expertise to bear with us at the Center for Security Policy, where he is now our Senior Director for Middle East related programs. We're always delighted to have him on the program here at Securing America. David Wurmser, welcome back.
Thanks. It's wonderful to be here, Frank.
Well, wonderful, except the things we have to talk about are not so wonderful, I'm afraid, at the moment. But let's get into it, David, with respect to what is happening on the ground in the Holy Land at the moment. The state of Israel seems to be seeing once again an uptick in the Palestinian terrorist violence that has been an affliction off and on over the years, intifadas of the past. Are we at the beginning, do you think, of a new intifada? And if so, why?
Yeah, we definitely are. I mean, the volume speaks a lot. 11 Israelis killed in 4 days, 3 separate terrorist attacks. There have been several other attempts. And we had over the last week or two a lot of incitement coming from the Palestinian Authority, coming from Hamas, coming from various Palestinian organizations. And as a result, there's definitely, even before the attacks, there was a climate and an expectation of escalation. Again, on Jerusalem, just like last year. And this terrorist wave, which is the worst Israel's faced in 20-some years, is very clearly the beginning of something much larger, unfortunately.
David, when you talk about incitement, that's a perennial problem with the Palestinian Authority, is it not? To say nothing of Hamas, but even the guys who are supposedly Israel's partners for peace, at least according to the Biden team, are endlessly promoting jihad against Israel and lionizing those who perpetrate it, are they not? And talk a little bit about the aftermath of, I think, this most recent terrorist attack on the streets of a town in the West Bank where the terrorist came from.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the incitement and so forth. The Palestinian Authority, the PLO. Let's remember, the Palestinian Authority is only a structure for the PLO, Yasser Arafat's organization that we also know well. It's only a structure for them to exist in the West Bank and Gaza. And they've never stopped being at war. They've never recognized Israel formally. They've never really reconciled with the legitimacy of Israel. They've never concluded a true peace with Israel. And instead, they've been preparing their populations over and over again, constantly, for war. The Palestinians of the West Bank, or I prefer to call it Judea and Samaria, they are more radical now, more instigated into violence and educated into violence from a young age now than they have been on any generation before. And this is an indictment of the Palestinian Authority, and it's worse. It's an indictment of the Europeans and Americans who fund these structures of education and incitement in those territories. As far as this terrorist attack, you see the results of it, not only in the terrorist attack itself, but across West Bank cities, whether it's Jenin or whether it's the various refugee camps, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Ramallah. It's celebratory. There are hundreds and thousands of people taking to the streets, shooting off firecrackers, handing out sweets to little children handing out sweets to everybody to celebrate the murder of these 5 Israelis. So there's a climate of war, climate of hatred of Jews, climate of anger that is carefully cultivated and weaponized and encouraged by the Palestinian Authority, which is ostensibly the partner for peace.
Yeah. David, on that score, the prospect that there might actually be at some point some opportunity for the Palestinians to vote on a new government, given what you've just said, suggests that it would almost certainly be even more aligned with the jihadists, Hamas, notably among them, were that to happen. To what extent is this, um, incitement to violence and indoctrination of the Palestinian people with the idea that only by liberating their, land, as they call it, from the Jordan to the sea, is there going to be an acceptable outcome? Is this being further intensified, would you say, by the perception that the U.S. government is now uh, no longer closely aligned, as it was certainly under Donald Trump, with the Israelis? That, in other words, there's daylight through which these guys can run and operate and wage war, as you say, against Israel.
There's a lot of daylight right now, and it is motivating a lot of the violence. I mean, whether it's in the UN Human Rights Commission, which today, despite everything going on in Ukraine and despite the terrorist attacks over the last week, will put forward and pass, I'm sure, 4 anti-Israeli resolutions that don't mention terrorism or anything today. It simply, and it will appoint a new rapporteur for the Palestinian affairs issue, who's basically said Israel's a Nazi country and should be treated like the Nazis were treated. So again, there's we've returned to this body. We left this body nearly half a decade ago. And this administration returned to it. And this was seen as an act that was hostile to Israel. The abandonment of the Israeli um, concerns, the complete ignoring of Israeli concerns, and frankly, Saudi, UAE, and Bahraini concerns about Iran and the terrorist designation of the IRGC, who's killed hundreds and probably thousands of Americans, let alone Jews and Israelis and other Arabs. Again, this is daylight. The statements by Secretary Blinken upon arriving in Israel, which focused on settler violence and the danger of settler violence, in this, our ambassador to Israel, Nidus, focusing on Israel shouldn't do stupid things like settlements and settler violence. The truth is, settler violence is very rare. It does occur. It's a problem. It shouldn't occur, but it's rare, and it hasn't killed any Palestinians at all, and it's not lethal at this point. That compared to the absolute massive volume of daily attacks on Jewish targets. And we hear about terrorist attacks that are lethal. We don't hear about the daily attacks where cars are driving on the highways and Molotov cocktails are thrown on them, rocks. We're talking about not pebbles. We're talking about rocks the size of your fist or larger being thrown at passing cars going 60 miles an hour, and so on and so forth. The amount of violence that Israeli settlers and Israelis traveling on Israeli roads going through Arab areas right now face is unbelievable. And then finally, the immense amount of violence inside the Arab communities against each other. None of this is what America's mentioning. And the perception in the Palestinian area is that's it. The United States is done with America. Now it's time to go after the Jews. That's essentially the mentality.
Yeah. David, this brings me to the Negev Summits that took place last week. Talk a little bit about the extent to which what was, I think, very hopefully a furthering of the relationship between Israel and a number of Arab states, on the one hand, was sabotaged by inclusion of the United States Secretary of State in the course of part of the summit. And again, to what extent does that feed into the larger problem that we're facing? Actually, I'm going to ask you to hold those thoughts. Come back to us in just a moment.